The Winnipeg Jets are now 1-3, and after a promising start against the Vegas Golden Knights, where it looked like the Jets might actually come away with a win against one of their most hated rivals, the Jets again fell just short. Is this team good? Is this team bad? We'll dive into the answer on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about a big topic recently, right? Because aside from the attendance and everything, the Jets are kind of in a weird state. They're 1-3, and I'm not sure if people see them as a bad team or a good team. Perhaps they even see them as an average team. I can tell you I'm leaning towards an answer, and it's probably not the one you think it is. We'll start off, though, with how the Jets performed against Vegas, because this is a game where, as you can tell, you see on the side, it says it was a mixed performance, and it was, in some ways. In other ways, I think the Jets can feel encouraged. Let's talk about the bad first, though, because the bad, I think, is what people really want to get into, and it's becoming a problem over at least the past couple of games. One of those issues is something that I think is going to be a longer-standing problem than the other. First bad thing right now is the goaltending. Hellebuyck and Brossoit, unfortunately, have not exactly made the final saves that you would expect them to. Hellebuyck especially has been a little bit leakier than usual. I wouldn't say that the goals that have beat him are really, really sloppy. It's not like the puck trickling through Markstrom's pads, right? Nothing of that nature, but certainly some shooting angles and stuff that Helly has traditionally covered and not really had an issue with. I think when we watch Hellebuyck, the big thing with him is that we're so used to him making fabulous, brain-melting, gravity-defying saves with this huge frame that when he doesn't, it's a lot more shocking. So he does usually start slow and starts to pick up over the next few weeks. I don't really have any concerns about him. Brossoit, I think, will be relatively okay. So goaltending-wise, I think that will work itself out. The bigger problem that we've got to talk about is the penalty kill, because the penalty kill was dreadful. I know that it at times will actually kill off a penalty, but I think that's more from either the goaltending or luck than anything, because it's so static, and it looks a lot more like the Paul Maurice penalty kill than what we're used to from last year. I don't know what Arniel changed this season, but it seems like there's no aggression. There's not a lot of pressure on puck carriers, and it feels like the opponents have way too much time and space to pass around the perimeter. Obviously, keeping the shots to the outside is always nice, but the problem is on a PK, obviously that changes a little bit when you have the odd man situation. So the Jets are really going to want to work on that, and we'll focus more on the PK in a little bit, because this year's PK versus last year's PK, it's like two totally different animals. So I want to spend a little more time talking about that in detail, but that's the not so fun stuff out of the way. The good. The Jets, generally speaking, were the much better team, especially in the second half of the game. Winnipeg, scored first, and of course they did concede a number of goals, trailing at one point by like 3-1. But let me tell you, when the Jets were applying pressure and creating tons of opportunities, they were consistently dominating Vegas in the offensive zone. Waves of pressure, and then defensively, zone entry denials at the other end, and then all of those turned into counters to seal the Vegas Golden Knights into their own zone. And that wave of pressure, just kept building and building to the point where it really felt like the Jets were going to score several goals. It could have been like 5-3 Winnipeg, and I felt like that would have been a pretty fair scoreline, because the Jets were absolutely buzzing. There were moments where it was just sheer luck, a random block shot, or a jaw-dropping save that kept the Jets off the board. Winnipeg was like so close on so many occasions, but just could not find pay dirt. You know who did, though? Alex Iafallo, he had himself a brace, 2 goals on the evening, and almost had himself a hat trick on at least 1 or 2 occasions. He has been really good, and I think the way that he scored his power play goal, where he slid into the slot where Scheifele does, usually hovers and just sort of uh, almost one-timed it, but not quite. A really fast wrister right home, beautiful shot, perfect placement, and that's the sort of stuff that I think I was kind of hoping for, but maybe not as consistently as he's done it so far. He's already had like 3 goals for the Jets, which is really impressive considering when he was brought on. I think a lot of people saw him as more of a cap dump, right? Maybe not a player who was going to get regular minutes at the level of like a top 6 player, but I'm telling you, I think he legitimately has some pop. I was excited about him when the Jets acquired him because having watched him a number of times in LA, what I always thought of him was sort of a player who could be sort of like a Matthew Perreault-esque presence, right? A very smart player who's crafty down low, who understands space really well and can exploit it to score great goals. He may not have like 100-point seasons, but I'll tell you what, you could see him hit 40 to 50 points this year, and I think it really wouldn't be that hard for him to do so. He's really crafty, he's really smart, and honestly, given some of the injury stuff that's been going on with Velarde out 4 to 6 weeks, I would prefer to see him slide up to the top 6. I think that's where he would be better served. I think he can really elevate the guys around him. He's a really good complementary player, and in terms of like scoring output and ability, he's great. Unfortunately, I think the Mason Appleton thing on the first line, that experiment really does need to end. He was not good enough, unfortunately. But I think Iafallo or Niederreiter, somebody of that caliber, could actually do that job pretty well. So, yeah, I look at this and I see a team that should be encouraged, right? I think that there's a lot of scoring ability on this team. Kupari has been really good in a bottom 6 role. Barron's been really good. Nemesnikov at times has been decent, although a couple of moments in this past game where I wasn't thrilled with him. Ehlers also looking a little rusty. I don't know if he's still injured or whatever, but he's definitely lacking a bit of a quickness to his step, and some of the dump and chase stuff that he does is very uncharacteristic of what we usually see with him. The top line, yeah, not so great with Appleton. That I think should change, but Sandberg had himself a really, really strong game. I thought he did well. You paired him with Pionk, and that was a pairing that relatively did okay. They as long as Sandberg can kind of keep doing the details and defensive work, you can kind of get away with it. But Stanley came in, and that didn't quite go according to plan. I really feel like Chisholm deserves a chance to get a spot here. I feel like of the guys that you could bring in for puck moving ability, Chisholm would actually do a lot to help. But as it was, the Jets with their weird lineup of Perfetti now not playing at center and being used as a wing with Nemesnikov down the middle, the Jets without Velarde, it still was a strong performance from this team, even with Bones' weird deployments and stuff. So, tough, right? Because you look at this team and you ask yourself, well, after 4 games, do we even know if they're good or bad? And I think we have an interesting answer, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at Jase Medical. When it comes to being prepared, you can never be too cautious. A lot of you might go hiking. Maybe you enjoy the great outdoors in other ways, whether you're camping or doing something else, but you never really can tell when disaster is going to strike. And Jase Medical wants to offer you a customizable Jase case with 5 of the most common antibiotics to help you be prepared for the field when the worst strikes. They also offer add-on medications, and they want to help you choose the Jase case that fits you and your family's unique needs. And of course, if you want to buy a gift card, you can also do that. If you want to help your family and friends get a Jase case, this is a great option. Obviously, having a suite of 5 of the most commonly used antibiotics means you can treat dozens of different ailments and infections, which is great for when the unprepared happens. And if you want to empower yourself and have the best chance at handling a crisis, Jase Medical is offering you a great discount just for listening. All you have to do is go to jasemedical.com and enter promo code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at jasemedical.com. While we're at it, I also did want to shout out our friends and partners at Bird Dogs. Those of you who have ever heard of Bird Dogs, you might know them for being a bit of a pants company, right? They've got some funky named pants, some of which I can't repeat on this podcast, but you might be saying to yourself, okay, well, aside from quirky names and an oddball sense of humor, what makes Bird Dogs special? Well, Bird Dogs are the khaki shorts that not only make you feel good, they also help give you a sculpted look that accentuates the good parts you like, right? And most importantly, they're super comfortable, right? A lot of shorts are made of really stiff fabric that doesn't really stretch all that much. So if you're going out golfing or having a night out on the friends, not only is it feeling kind of tight and rigid down there, it starts sweating a little bit. That's why Bird Dogs is great, because they use an anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that's made with like a cloud knit fabric to give you a cool, stretchable, breezy feeling without sacrificing the look and style you want. Bird Dogs, again, are super comfortable, they look great, and they have plenty of styles for all occasions. So if you're ready to get started, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL right now, or enter promo code LockedOnNHL at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off, we promise you. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we tackle a big question with the Jets, right? Are they a good team or are they a bad team? And looking at a 1-3 record, you'd say, well, looks like they're kind of a bad team. But that's not really true. I'd actually say that this is a good team with a couple of critical errors right now that are currently haunting them just a bit, enough to sort of upset the apple cart, right? Here's the thing, right? The issues that this team has are relatively fixable. The goaltending is something that I think will correct itself over time, so I'm not that worried about that. I do think, though, that the special teams is a point of concern. And as you can see at the end, we're going to spend some time talking about the PK, because there were some adjustments that were made this year that kind of harken back to previous years where the PK was among the league's worst. And so far, based on the fact that the Jets are killing around, like, I don't know, I thought it was like around 75% of the opportunities. That is pretty dog water, if we're being honest. Having seen what this PK was last year, I know it's not the players. It's definitely a coaching and systems change that is causing all of this. So I want to talk about that. But otherwise, right, you look at the rest of the team, and what weaknesses would you say stand out? Injury depth could be one answer, and I think we're going to see that tested over the next few weeks. I will say Vilardi only having a sprained MCL is super good news. It could have been a lot worse. We could have been seeing him done for months or even, at worst, the season. Just look at Kirby Dach, who has a torn ACL and MCL. Really awful for him. Whole season's over after such a promising start. Yeah, it's tough. So Vilardi really dodged a bullet, and so did we. But for the next 4 to 6 weeks, the Jets are going to have to improvise. And obviously the injury depth is not great, but I'll say this. I think the Jets are reasonably well equipped to handle it because they have so many quality players up and down the lineup. Now, whether Bones elevates the right ones, I think is another question. That I do have some concerns about, but in the meantime, roster-wise, at least this team should be able to get through the worst of the crisis, barring any more injuries. Where I think the Jets have a particular roster problem, though, is less so injury-related and more just with the defense. That blue line unit really needs some work, and we've talked about it ad nauseum before, but I got to say, I think it's really shown itself when Dillon and Schmidt are struggling. We've seen them had to be split at times. It's just... yeah, I don't know what to do with this pairing, right? And both guys are struggling in their own ways. Schmidt just seems slow and his decision-making isn't really where it needs to be. Dillon is struggling to make passes and do some of the stuff that we're used to seeing with him. He's sluggish, he gets turned inside out easily. It's rough because both guys I actually thought were pretty strong defensively in previous years. This season, though, not so much. So something to keep an eye on. Schmidt got benched in favor of Stanley, and Stanley promptly didn't have that good of a game. They asked Bones about it, and the most he said was he had a decent game, did what he was asked to do, what we needed him to do. And when that's the kind of praise that you're getting, I think it says a lot from the coaching staff's perspective that they're not overly impressed. There was no effusive praise. There was no overwhelmingly glowing reviews. Just he came in, did his job, and that was it. So yikes. Probably not a confidence booster if you are Stanley fighting for a roster spot. Now, I've spent a lot of time saying stuff that sounds negative, and look, these are big problems. But I'll tell you this, the Jets are so good in creating offensive opportunities, at controlling play at 5v5. They've done it for 3 out of the last 4 games. And I'm telling you, I think this team is really close. I think with a few key changes, this team could be a real pain in the butt. As it is, it's already a pain in the butt enough. Look how hard Vegas had to win to come out with how hard Vegas had to work to come out with a win the other night. The Jets made their lives heck, and it was clear from waves of pressure, tons of forechecking that was actually good and fruitful, forced turnovers, intercepted passes, rapid counters. The Jets genuinely put Vegas under more stress than I think they've had in a lot of the games thus far. So Winnipeg, I'm telling you, I think this team is really close to being really good. But they do need to make some adjustments, and the coaching staff is going to have to get their heads straight on a few things that they're kind of making some puzzling choices with. The deployments bother me. Some of the line combos don't really make sense. And the way that they've deployed the defense, yeah, I think they've already figured that out, that wasn't working. So they're just going to go back to sheltering Schmidt and Dillon together. But the front office is going to have to make some changes. I think that much is clear because this team's roster as it is inefficient in some very inconvenient places, but it's fixable. It's workable, but you do want to take some time to address it before things go on for too long and you find yourself stuck with a bit of an anchor. So yeah, the question of whether or not the Jets are good or bad, I think for me, I'm going to lean towards the Jets being pretty good. I think things will turn if you keep playing at this way, at this level and sustaining this way of attacking. I think good things will come. The Jets just need to be patient and they need to make the right changes at the right time. So keep an eye out for that. We'll keep track on how the Jets are doing with that. But one thing I did want to spend a little bit more time talking about is the PK and what I've noticed with it compared to last year, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Sleeper. Mark Scheifele scores a hat trick, the Winnipeg Jets win the Stanley Cup, and if you want to win 100 times your money, play daily fantasy hockey on the Sleeper app. These are all things that could happen this year, but to have a chance at winning big, you've got to play daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper. As the official daily fantasy app of the LOCKEDON NHL Network, Sleeper is our top choice for daily fantasy sports, and in particular, daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can in fact win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick more or less stats on many of the league's top players, whether it's Cale Makar, Alexander Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Mark Scheifele, Patrick Laine, whoever it is, they've got stats tracking for goals, assists, saves, and so much more. So Winnipeg Jets fans, if you want 100 times your payout on Sleeper, start paying attention and get your picks right so you can win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL when you're setting up, and you'll get $100, up to $100 match on your very first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we talk about the not-so-special teams recently, and it's not the power play. The power play, I got to say, kind of rocks. Although there were some moments in the past few games where they had some really bad zone entry denials, but I think that's more an outlier than what we've seen, which is Winnipeg generating a buzzsaw of chances down low. That stuff looks really good, and we saw Iafallo capitalize on at least one of those chances. So there's a lot to like with the power play. I'm not as concerned about that. What I am worried about, though, is the PK. Whew, it's been bad. We're talking really, really bad. And one thing that apparently the Jets have changed with this PK unit is that when the diamond is out there, you notice that they don't really create a lot of pressure. The puck carriers are given a lot of time and space to make passes, and how the Jets have often done it in the past under Maurice is one guy tries to pressure and cut off a lane, but everyone else is mostly static. The problem with Winnipeg's PK structure is that it's so slow and so static and doesn't really disrupt opponents all that often, that when you have the odd man situation, the opponent is usually able to win those second chance puck battles, and then, the guys will try and clear it out along the walls. They get picked off, it gets turned over, and suddenly the Jets have conceded a goal. that's been happening a lot. We've seen guys like Nemesnikov repeatedly turn it over on the PK. We've seen guys throw the puck along the walls. Those have turned into interceptions, and it's lucky when the Jets don't concede goals off of that. I think Winnipeg is kind of living beyond its means with this PK, which is saying a lot because it already has one of the worst percentages in the league. So, yeah, Winnipeg's PK has been really bad, and it's a big problem because so far the Jets seemingly take a lot of penalties. It's not a good sign if the Winnipeg Jets PK is already this poor, and this discipline hasn't been ideal. If we're being honest, I think Winnipeg will certainly want to clean those behaviors up. I think when you look at this team's PK structure and their ability to kill those opportunities off, it's been a little dire so far. Winnipeg, I think, is really struggling with it. I think the Jets defense has not been able to clear the puck effectively. The forwards have struggled with it too. And even when they do clear it out, the guys are so gassed that by the time the next shift comes on and spells them for relief, those guys eventually have to come off, and the first unit comes back on. They're still not recovered from the last PK shift. So Winnipeg, I think, really needs to clean this up. It is a huge sore spot, and I think right now it's one of the biggest reasons the Jets are 1-3. If the Jets had a decent PK, I don't know that we'd really be having this conversation. I think the Jets might actually have like a 2-2 or even 3-1 record. And maybe that doesn't sound all that impressive in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's really I think it should really illustrate, broadly speaking, why I'm saying this team is good and really on the verge of being something much better. The changes that the Jets have to make, that they could make to turn the season around, it's really just a couple of minor things, relatively speaking, but they have a huge impact on the rest of the downstream effects of what this roster is going through. So, yeah, I keep coming back to this point that I think after what we've seen so far, I'm pretty impressed with what Winnipeg has. I think this team is better than the record has shown. I think that they should be 3-1 or something of that nature. They've outplayed most of their opponents, and we're not talking about crap franchises. The Jets have done really well so far against teams like Vegas, and they had a good game against the Florida Panthers, got rewarded for it. They did really well against the Flames, but just somehow could not finish off their opportunities. I got to say, I think this team is better than it gets credit for. The Kings game is one of the rare exceptions where the Jets got thoroughly embarrassed. That one, you probably want to ignore and pretend didn't happen, because otherwise you're going to be annoyed by the result and by what we saw in it. But I'll say this, though. I still think that this team is destined for a playoff run. Winnipeg in previous years, like the 2017-2018 team, had a pretty similar start to what we're seeing now, but they weren't even as effective at 5v5 as this team has been early into the season. So I would say I'm leaning towards this team being one to watch for the future, and it might come over the next few weeks. But we've got to be, open-minded about things. If things really aren't working and the Jets are struggling to make ends meet, it might be time to start talking about selling towards the deadline. But I think this team is going to be too good for that. I think this Jets squad, again, is just a few weeks away from really starting to threaten and scare other opponents. But let me know your thoughts on the start of the season. How do you feel about the team so far? What would you change? What are you impressed with? Maybe also give me what you're most disappointed with. Drop those thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's show, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making us your first listen of the day, every day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with more Jets coverage and a recap of Winnipeg versus Edmonton, so stay tuned and don't go anywhere. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.